Is Jamaica Inn a forgotten gem by legendary director Alfred Hitchcock? Or is it better that it's been left in the past? Find out today on Really Old Movies. Welcome to Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin, and today I'll be discussing Jamaica Inn from 1939 by the director Alfred Hitchcock, and some essential movie details. So, this film was riddled with problems between Charles Laughton, who's the main villain of the film, and Alfred Hitchcock. Laughton wanted more creative control because he was a more prominent actor during this time, and he wasn't used to not really getting his way. And Hitchcock, he's pretty much the same thing, but as a director, so they were constantly butting heads. And the result is Hitchcock deciding to never work with Laughton again, and this also marks the last British film Hitchcock would make until the 70s. Now, he was kind of planning on moving anyways. This movie kind of brought him to international acclaim for Alfred Hitchcock. So, yeah, it's kind of fitting that this is the last movie he made in England until around the 70s near his death. And despite it being a major success, especially when it was released, it's been largely forgotten, and it's not really one of the Hitchcock films you hear about when you talk about him and about his work. So the basic plot for the Jamaica Inn: a young woman, played by Maureen O'Hara, she decides to move in with her aunt and uncle at the Jamaica Inn, which is an inn in Cornwall, after the death of her mother. She discovers her uncle is involved in a gang of ruffians who lure ships to the shore and steal all the items on board. Unbeknownst to all except for her uncle, the gang is really being run by the local squire, Sir Humphrey Pengallan, who's played by Charles Laughton. So that's the basic plot for the film. Alright, so now let's get into my thoughts on the film. So the plot, I gave a 3 out of 5. I thought it was pretty good. I liked how I really had no idea how it was going to end. In classic Hitchcockian style, he kind of throws in different curveballs and twists and turns into it that kind of throw you off and keep you on the edge of your seat. Like especially Traherne, who's one of the ruffians, he turns out he's actually an undercover cop. And that Pengallan, he's actually in charge of the robberies, which you find out earlier on in the movie. And that's only known to us, the audience, and Joss, who's the other leader of the gang. And then, acting-wise, I gave a 4 out of 5. I love Maureen O'Hara. She did really excellent in her first go as an actress. Very impressed with her work here. So I didn't know she was British, so that's pretty impressive that later on she had a pretty good American accent. So she's very talented in this role. And then Charles Laughton, he's very interesting as Pengallan. He's a very unique and very eccentric character. And I thought he was perfectly weird and creepy, especially when he's trying to fawn over Maureen's character. Her name is Mary. And I thought the actor who played Joss, he was pretty good. You know, we're not supposed to like him. He's a pretty terrible person, especially to Patience, who's Mary's aunt. But we almost feel sorry for him near the end of the movie. So that's a pretty interesting character arc too. You don't typically see that in movies in this era. Now, all the other actors were okay, and the actor who played Traherne, he was pretty boring and not that interesting to me. So, but other than that, I really liked everyone else. I give it a 4 out of 5. Now, in regards to directing, now, when it comes to Hitchcock, you know, directing-wise and all of that, that's usually the most important thing about his movies, because he's this great creative wizard, basically. I gave him a 3.5 out of 5. I don't think this is his best work, and it has a lot of his Hitchcock-isms, if you will. You know, you have complicated characters who are kind of good, kind of bad, things that the audience knows, but some characters know, i.e. dramatic irony. Now, despite all of that, you could really tell he had trouble with Charles Laughton. You know, there's a lot of scenes with him, and if you read the behind the scenes about the movie, Lofton kind of took over in a lot of parts and kind of overstepped his boundaries a lot. So it made it pretty difficult for Hitchcock to really like working on the movie. And it also added a couple more comedic elements that Hitchcock doesn't normally use. Hitchcock's is more of dark humor, and this movie had kind of silly moments, but also some dark ones too. So, other than that, though, gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Again, not Hitchcock's best work, but it's not the worst either. Alright, now cinematography and special effects, I gave a 3 out of 5. I thought it was pretty good. I liked the little model ships they had on water and the different special effects they did with that, like the lightning and whatnot. It was pretty impressive stuff. Those are used in the wrecking scenes. The Jamaica Inn itself is a pretty interesting set. It's got a whole staircase and ceiling. And it's like a 2-story looking one, which you typically wouldn't see in a movie in this era. So that was pretty impressive too. But other than that, it was okay. It wasn't anything unique or different. For the most part, it was pretty standard. Now, the music I did not like. There was hardly any in it at all. Pretty quiet movie without it. So I give it a 1 out of 5. There's just hardly any in it at all. Okay, so with all that, that tallies up my Letterboxd score to a 2.9, which I'm going to round up to a 3 out of 5. So, good movie. Not one of Hitchcock's best, and I would recommend it. And to answer the initial question, though, is this one that's kind of a forgotten gem? Almost. I think it's almost a forgotten gem, because there's some problems with it. Like I said, especially with the direction and Charles Lofton, taking over a lot of it. It doesn't really feel completely like a Hitchcock film. It kind of feels like it's almost a Hitchcock film. So I say it's probably best left in the past unless you're a really diehard Hitchcock fan. I don't think an average moviegoer will really understand or like this movie too much. And especially the fact they have very thick European accents. They're all English actors, of course, but for me, they were pretty hard to understand. I had to put on subtitles, and it doesn't help too that the audio is kind of aged. This movie was made in 1939, and sound was relatively new, so it's pretty tough to understand. And yeah, it was okay. And evidently, it's based on a book that was released a couple years earlier. And from my understanding, it's not a very faithful adaptation, but it's okay. It's a pretty good, like, middle of the road movie. So unless you're a diehard Hitchcock fan, I don't think you'll really have any interest in this movie. So yeah, that's what I'll say. I think it's best left in the past. There's a good reason why people have kind of forgotten about it. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook to get behind the scenes updates about the week's particular film. And also make sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts where you can listen to new episodes. And new episodes are released at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Fridays. And also make sure to follow us on YouTube where I'll release a monthly video. And the next one will be released March 5th about my top 10 1930s movies. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. This has been Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin. Take care.